Hi
Cool.
there, this is Sherry Minelli from RJM Music, and I'm here with Ron Minelli and Roslin is our guest today. And it is really hard to tell you what Rosh does because he kind of does everything. I mean, you're a drummer, a guitar player, you've worked with the guitar techs, you work a lot with fractals, you work with um sometimes you help people program like the GTs and the RJM music stuff. You do so much that I've decided it would be better if you introduce yourself today and and yeah, tell us more about what you do because that's kind of difficult to peg you into just one little, space.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm Rosh. Hello, everybody. So I would say first and foremost, I'm a musician, but I also, if there's a catch-all, I always say I'm a production tech. So a lot of what I do is work with guitar techs, work with artists, work with guitar players, and help program all their sounds, get all the switching happening, work with Ableton playback rigs, and basically behind the scenes get everything functioning so that the artists can play, the guitar players, all they need to do is, step on a button and all their sounds change. And so a lot of what I've done in this world is work very closely with all the artists, getting the sounds exactly dialed in from the record, figuring out solutions on how to get their gear from one place to another, what type of solutions, how can we fly this rig? Maybe if we're touring with it, we're gonna, maybe ship it on rocket cargo. Are we gonna go overseas with this kind of rig? And getting all those things happening. So it's like part logistics, part being creative and coming up with solutions to help any guitar player or any of the other musicians on the stage, basically be able to perform, because they don't want to be thinking about, well, which button do I hit to go to the verse or the chorus of this song? They would just want to play. So in a nutshell, that's kind of what I do. I work very closely with all the RJM stuff. So some of the artists that I've worked with are Def Leppard, Melissa Etheridge, A Perfect Circle, um, No Effects, Papa Roach, Steve Vai, Dweezil Zappa. I'm starting to kind of blank out on everybody that I've worked with, but so I've been really fortunate to do this all in LA. So and now ever since the beginning of 2020, I've also expanded into doing this remotely for a lot of different people, because all over the world people are using all these kinds of switching devices, and then they always are curious on like, what is the most efficient way I can either do this for as something as small as like, hey, I'm just in the studio and I just need to build a bunch of different sounds and I need the best tone possible when I record. Or they could be in a touring band, they could be in like an original band, and what they're doing is they're building presets so that they can play in their touring band or their tribute band or whatever kind of thing. Other people come to me and maybe they're touring behind an artist and they say, hey, I'm going to be touring with XYZ artist and I need to build all these sounds. It's going to be a bunch of fly dates. How do I get all these sounds into like a rig that I can actually take on an airplane that's not going to weigh over 50 pounds and all these kinds of things. So yeah, all that would be in this world what I do. Outside of that, obviously, I'm also a working musician. I play all kinds of gigs, tour behind all kinds of artists. I play guitar and drums. And then when I'm at home, I'm usually just building a lot of racks and guitar rigs for a lot of different clients, programming their pedal boards, getting stuff out to rehearsals and touring bands.
Wow. So, let's see, of all the RJM music rigs that you've worked on, or of all the rigs that you've worked on that had RJM music gear, what do you think was your favorite, or the biggest, the baddest, the whatever?
So I've been working with a lot of RJM products over the years, but I think the one that maybe put me on the map, I guess, with like a household name, because up until I started working with them, and the band is Def Leppard. The up until I started working with them, I was working more in, let's say the Warped Tour or Ozfest kind of band scene. So there were all these like hard rock bands, metal bands, punk bands, and if I was like going home to see my mom, she's like, "Oh, who are you working with?" And I was like, I'd name some band, and she's like, "Oh, cool. I don't know who that is." But the minute you say, "Hey, I'm currently working with Def Leppard," everybody more or less knows who that is. And so they were using the GT series, all of their pedal boards, to do all their switching. So it was like the GT 22, and at the time when I started working with them, they were still using the huge refrigerator racks. So they had JMPs, they had um, tri-choruses in there. They had, backups of every effects rack unit, all the reverbs, delays, everything like that. So they needed something that was going to be very robust, that can control, so many different pieces in a rack, get them to all switch correctly, get them to all switch to different patches. And the other thing was they wanted it to be easy to program, because Def Leppard at the time, they were doing different types of touring. So at the time when I was started with them, they were doing a summer tour with Kiss. So sometimes, and they were co-headlining. So some shows were like 2 hours long. Some shows were like 1 hour long. They had all these different set lists that they were going to be playing. If they're doing more of a festival date, it's going to be maybe a shorter thing. If they're doing a headlining show at the Forum, then they're going to be playing a longer show. And so they wanted a simple, effective way to go between set lists and just go, okay, here's the set list that we're going to do when we play this length of show. Here's the set list that we're going to do when we play all these other, maybe a different length. Maybe they're doing just like a, TV performance and they're only going to perform 3 or 4 songs. And back in the day when I was programming a lot of MIDI controllers that didn't have any functionality like this, I was literally by hand, thumbs, holding down the buttons, stepping through the bank up and bank down switches and trying to rename the preset. And it was a nightmare, because even a simple request is like, hey, we're going to play song 3 and we're going to stick that at the end of the set now. And you would get asked that as a tech. And I was like, oh, wow, that's going to be about 2 hours of work just to reorder all the presets by hand. There's no editor.
Seriously.
Yeah. And at the time, you're also, with all the text, you still have to set up the gear. You still have to restring the guitars. You still have to make sure they all work, get all the electronics working. And it was so great to work with products that just have an editor that you could do on a laptop. It's just dragging and dropping. And the other thing is, yes, of course, you can do the programming on the controller itself and switch between set lists, and the menus are really easy. But just being able to plug a USB cable into the unit and just switch on the fly, like, okay, cool, we're going to do the 2-hour headlining set list tonight instead of the 1 hour direct supports set list. So, and then doing that with all the different MIDI devices. So I used to have these huge spreadsheets of, okay, the JMP is going to switch to channel 1 on this song in the verse, but I need to turn on the reverb. I need to make sure the chorus is on patch 2. And just keeping that organized, it's really easy to see that in the preset function on all the RJM products, especially in the editor. You just pull up the set list. It's like intro of some song. And you just look, okay, cool, we're going to turn on this reverb. We're going to patch 2 on this. The JMP is going to go to this. And it's all visually laid out there. And you can make just a quick, adjustment. Maybe, Vivian Campbell at the time would be like, oh, when the last show, when we played it, there was the delay was too long in this section of the song or in the solo. Can we switch to a different delay sound? And he would actually sometimes turn to the patch that he wanted on the rack unit. He's like, can we actually just go to this one instead of the other one? Now, again, in the previous non-editor way, I'd have to go in there, turn the loop on, figure out which MIDI channel is being sent to, and I'm diving through menus to do that. And it would just be so time consuming. Now this is just like click, 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 send down to the RJM, and it's done. So go ahead.
Did you work with Wolfie and Scott Appleton?
Yes. They were so wonderful to bring me on. At the time, Scotty was, he was working also with Rush. So he was kind of bouncing back and forth between Rush and Def Leppard. So they just needed extra hands to come in there. And they knew that, they got my name through the grapevine. Everybody here, it's a very small community in terms of techs. So, everybody knows everybody. My name got thrown in the hat and they said, hey, your name keeps coming up. Can you just come down, be an extra hand? You know all these units inside and out. Can you program all this kind of stuff? And I said, absolutely, no problem. And they're also integrating new gear into the rig, as they always do. Def Leppard loves just experimenting. They don't want to play the songs the same exact way like the record. They love being a live band. They're like one of the best live bands on earth. So they were integrating new gear. How do we get the new gear in with the old gear? And again, just using a RJM switcher, it's very easy. You just go, okay, cool. One MIDI cable goes into the new unit, figure out where the presets are, and then you can start integrating that into the rig. Just want to double check. Is it a recording? Is it still recording?
Let's see. And record. Yeah, I think it is still recording.
Okay,
I hope
cool.
so.
Just double checking.
That would be bad if it wasn't.
All good.
So were you around when the rig had the IS-84 in it? It was one of the custom things we did for them.
I think so. Yeah, it was the loop switcher.
I don't know, Ron. What would you call it?
It's a sort of a specialized switcher that's used for typically for like if they have like multiple wireless receivers.
Yes.
And
yes.
So that's like kind of a sort of a in a way sort of a customized effect gizmo, but it's more for like 8 ins and 4 outs.
Yes. I have to hand it off to you, Ron. That was so cool because also for me, when I was brought on, they were transitioning out some of the acoustic sounds because they were like, well, we got to switch guitars, or do we put like the acoustic on a stand? Like they were trying to come up with all these solutions to do that. And they said, well, why don't we use piezo pickups for the acoustic sound? So like the intro of Foolin', for example, is kind of like an acousticy kind of sound. And so we were using the IS-84 to switch from the electric to the acoustic sound. So the acoustic sound would be sent into a fractal, it would have some processing on it. And then, and they were even like tone match from the record. And it was so great because it was just like, instead of trying to get an electric guitar to kind of sound like an acoustic, and you're getting the worst of both worlds, rather than just like, can we just get an acoustic sound from a piezo pickup, add a little bit of extra, whatever EQ processing on it, throw a little bit of tone match to sweeten it so it sounds like the original record, and then use the IS to just switch between the two sounds. And it was seamless. They didn't have to worry about like, do I switch the guitar? The techs don't have to worry about switching the patch perfectly in time. There's no bleed in between the electric sound and the acoustic sound. So yeah, that when I started with that, I was like, that is such a brilliant solution. And Scotty was also using that with Alex Lifeson's guitars as well, because at the time, if I remember correctly, Alex had the his signature Gibson guitar that also had a stereo out jack of the guitar. And so he was also switching between acoustic and electric sounds. And again, just to do this seamlessly, because, the number one thing for all the people that, do what I do is we want to just make it so that all they have to focus on, the guitar player or the artist, just play and perform, that so that all they have to do, they don't even have to do some of the switching now. We can send MIDI on the playback if they're using playback, and it just does all the switching for them. But at the time, like for example, when I was working with Def Leppard, it was like Vivian wanted a little bit of control on stage. Maybe he wants to add the tube screamer or something on top of the sound that he's already doing. But he also doesn't want to, he wants to go down and perform. And then so now the techs can handle the switching. And so the cool thing was integrating 2 GT rigs, one that was on stage, one that was at, Techland.
Oh, okay.
And having the tech just watching the show and staying on in-ears and just going, okay, cool, he's going to go solo. I can control the wah that's going to be fed into the rack. So even the expression pedals were kind of like working synchronously between both what was on stage and then what was back at Guitarland. And so Vivian could, control the wah, or his tech Wolfie could control the wah, or they could trade off depending on what song. And these are the things that like most people don't really know about that go to a show like this. And you have to, it's almost like a dance. You have to kind of choreograph like, okay, what's going to happen? Who's covering what? Is the tech going to do it? Is the artist going to do it? What if the artist feels like he wants to do it this time, but not always every time? They just want to feel free to express themselves. And products like all the RJM products just let them do that. Hit one button, they don't have to worry about it. And the greatest thing for me is always in this world is like, they do a show, we get all the gear on the truck after production and rehearsals and tour, and then like there's no phone calls. There's no, which is so great. Maybe an email, hey, we're out in, wherever, it's beautiful in south of France. Thank you so much. Everything sounds great. But if there's never a phone call or email, I'm like, yes, I did my job. Everything's cool. because the things you don't want. So if we're talking about funny stories,
Yeah, we were thinking maybe you have a Spinal Tap moment, one that you can actually share of something that, like is
sure.
going wrong and like how you get in there and, save the day or
Y-
something.
Yeah, so now in the land of now, let's fast forward to like the last couple years, everybody's being able to do this remotely. Again, one of the best things about all the RJM products is that they all have an editor. And I know I've been singing the praises about the editor just in terms of like actually working on site with a client or an artist or anything, but the editor, I can work with anybody anywhere in the world as long as there's an internet connection. So I've had phone calls such as, Rosh, what are you, I pick up the phone, I'm like, oh, interesting. This person never calls me. Pick up the phone, hey, what's up? And they go, all right, doors are in about 6 hours. How quickly can you get to Burbank Airport? We can fly you out on the next flight. And it's like a, 2-hour flight, and pick you up in an Uber and get here because the rig is not like, we don't know what's going on. And I go, okay, before we start trying to pay for flight and figuring out how I'm going to get to Burbank, oh no, there's no flight out of Burbank. I got to get to LAX, which is all the way across town for me. What if we just get the laptop on the rig, connect to the internet, jump on Zoom, stick a USB cable in the laptop. Let me just see what's going on. And then, which is great. So I can actually screen share, control their laptop, and then look in the look in the editor and go, okay, is there anything weird? Oh, okay, I see what's going on. Somebody, switch one preset or patch to this or whatever. And then obviously I'm saving on airfare. I'm saving on the stress. They're going to be able to make doors, do the rehearsal. I mean, the FaceTime calls that are happening very last minute, they do happen occasionally, and sometimes compensating for the time zone. I had a client that was like out in Singapore or something, and they called me and it was 4 a.m. here or something. And like right before sound check there, I could be wrong on the times, but I just remember getting a phone call very early in the morning going like, oh, this is definitely an emergency. It would usually be a text or an email. So these are the kinds of things that like we as techs, we don't want to have happen, but having an editor that you can operate remotely is just another fail-safe. So, some, like for example, there was a band that went out to Europe. Somebody plugged it into like, didn't plugged it into European power, but it wasn't on the right, voltage. And it just like wiped everything. And I
Oh
was
boy.
like, oh no, what are we going to do? And they go, well, we have the backup RJM. And I go, perfect. We saved all your presets in Dropbox. Here's the Dropbox link. I will FaceTime you, call me, Zoom me, whatever. And we can just drag and drop that into the unit and it's going to function like normal. And I mean, we're talking a 10-minute Zoom call, maybe to just do that, if that. Loaded everything in. They just said, stay on the phone while we do sound check. I said, no problem, and then they did the whole thing and the show went off without a hitch. These are the kinds of things that in the modern touring world, we want to have as many backups and fail safes to mitigate against any of this stuff. Sometimes people, will inadvertently, like maybe, I've seen this happen a couple times, they leave the laptop on top of the subwoofer and then the magnet just wipes the laptop, or they leave the pedal board on top of the
Oh.
subwoofer and it just wipes everything. Like these are the kinds of things that, or, even just damage in shipping,
Oh, yeah, I mean, how many times does, like, a truck roll over some of the gear?
exactly. These are the kinds of things that we want to like prevent, if it gets ripped apart at the airport, it doesn't make it in time. We want to have a backup of a backup of a backup of a backup. So having it in the cloud, having it in an email, having it in a Dropbox. I was doing some travel recently. I was out in Spain, and again, a client calls me, oh my God, it's not working. And I go, okay, cool. Here, and I don't even have my laptop with me. I'm standing on the corner, like I'm waiting for the subway in Spain. And I go, okay, cool. I have the Dropbox file on my phone. Let me text you the Dropbox link, and it's done and easy to do. So like, these are the kinds of things in the modern touring world. You bring up a backup guitar, you bring up backup picks, strings, all this kind of stuff. Now in the digital age of switching systems and everything like that, there's even having the bulletproof rig, just having the presets backed up to the cloud. So I always tell all my clients, like, back up everything just in case. And Ron, all your products are always bulletproof. Like the only time I've ever seen anything like happen is always like actual physical damage. you know, like something that looks like it's been just hit by a bus. And I go,
Or
well,
by a guitar.
yeah. And those are the kinds of things
That's
that,
happened twice.
yeah, those are the kinds of things like, you know, and the cool thing is too, like, for example, I have, you know, there's a touring guitar player that I work with a lot, and he was going to go to, and he was doing a lot of flying back and forth between two big artists. So he was like, you know, because these two artists wouldn't like do like back-to-back shows. So sometimes he would have like a week off and he would fly and do like the one-off date with like a secondary artist. And he was like, well, I can't always fly with my pedal board because it's always on the truck. What can we do? I said, oh, that's really easy. You can just build like the set list and the presets that you're going to have for this artist A, and then you can have artist B's presets here. And then all you have to do is, you know, 2 clicks on here in the menu and you can switch between all the presets. The thing I love about like, you know, we've been talking about a lot of the GT stuff. The stuff I love about the PBC is really great because a lot of times with, as a touring guitar player, you're always using backline amps. You don't know what kind of amp you're going to get. Maybe you get an amp that has like a relay switcher, so it can actually switch the channels on the amp. So you have a set of presets like, cool, if I get a channel switching amp, these are what I'm going to do. And then you show up and it's like a Fender Twin and it's just like a clean amp. You're going to have to use your overdrive pedals, do that. It's the same show. It's got to be the same show for the artist. If the artist is hearing something completely different in their ears or on stage than they're used to, they're going to turn around and be like, oh, you know, they can't always explain it. And also it's not their job to like do that. Their job is to perform, to be the artist who they are. And if the side, you know, the side man, side woman is playing guitar, they want to make sure that the sounds are consistent from show to show, regardless of the backline amp. So some artists that I work with, or some guitar players that I work with who tour with artists, I go, okay, cool. Let's build a set of presets. They're going to use just your overdrive pedals. Let's say you get a Fender Twin, a JC120, a Fender Deluxe on the gig. Cool. Then if the artist is like, hey, I'm endorsed by, you know, Marshall, Mesa Boogie, any amp company that may or may not have channel switching amps, I go, cool, we can just do that. And it's simple as just popping in a stereo TRS cable into the, you know, the relay to switch the channels on the amp. You can do this in stereo. You can do this in mono. So some of these artists and bands that I work with, they go, okay, cool, here's the mono rig. Here's the stereo rig. Here's the wet, dry, wet rig for the same artist, for the same person. And they don't have to like sit there and unplug and replug pedals and program new sounds. It's like, we do that all in production. I go, hey, when you show up to the gig, here's how you go from the mono rig to the stereo rig to the channel switching stereo rig to the channel switching mono rig. And they're all just in there. And then here's all the set lists. If the set list lanes are different, I mean, it's such a great. I can't speak highly enough of like how great that is, because I've been on the other side of that, being the guitar player who shows up and I'm hoping there's a channel switching amp and then I get the Fender Twin or something. I go, oh, no, okay, I gotta like figure out my presets. I'm doing 12 songs for this artist. They're used to hearing a certain way. Now I got to adjust all my pedals, unplug certain things, and it's like a nightmare. Or you're sitting there just sweating and just looking down at your feet the whole time and you don't even have a chance to perform. The cool thing is, for a lot of these guitar players, all they do is the rig functions exactly the same way, regardless of what kind of setup they got behind them, regardless of the amps or the pedals that they're using. So that's why I always recommend the RJM products anytime I get into a production rehearsal with a client. I just go, well, you know, Ron's got a list of products that are perfect for this kind of situation that'll like solve all this.
So Ron, do you have any questions in particular for Rosh? I have a few that I wanted to ask otherwise.
Sure.
Well, I mean, one thing, you know, I think the obvious question is, so how did you get into this? How did you find yourself being this go-to guy?
Yeah. Well, I moved to LA, went to college, and I grew up in San Diego, so we're a stone's throw away, you know, from LA. So I was always kind of playing in bands in Orange County and San Diego. And so when I moved to LA for college, I was just like, hey, I'll just start getting in the scene here. And just like anything else, you meet a ton of people, you meet your people, and they start getting you on gigs. They start calling you if you're a good player. And so in the touring world, I came up right around the time when everybody was switching from guitar amps and pedal boards to modeling rigs, for example. So for stuff like the Helix, the Fractal, the Kemper, and these were starting to become the solutions for touring bands, because sometimes it was budget, sometimes it was just like the consistency of venue to venue, sometimes they wanted silent stages, sometimes we're on in-ears and these kinds of things. So as a guitar player, I was always just trying to make sure I just like got my sounds as good as I can get them, regardless of the rig. And so most of the guitar players, let's say of my generation that were starting to tour and play gigs in town, they were still like just holding on to the pedal board amp kind of paradigm. And I love tube amps and pedal boards, and I still have, I still use them when I can. But I was always the kind of person who embraced new technology. And so I found that I was, people would see me in production rehearsals, just like sitting there in the rack, just programming stuff. And I was just learning this stuff on the fly. And I was very fortunate to work with really competent techs who were so happy to share their information. I was like, oh, why does it sound like this in my in-ears? How do I get it to sound better? What kind of switching are we doing? And I just kind of had an aptitude for it, which I think was, like I was always good with computers. My parents are software engineers. So it's like, it was an easy transition for that kind of thing for me. So as I started meeting all the guitar techs and meeting other guitar players on gigs and tours, they were just like, hey, can you program my XYZ pedal? Can you program my modeling rig? Can you program all this kind of stuff? Because the sounds that you're getting sound really good. And so, and again, this is kind of like, we're all just running around, just, in my early 20s, I'm just running around from gig to gig. And so it was a lot of the guitar techs started recommending me for some tech, doing tech and production things for different bands and artists that they were touring. So, and the thing was, like, sometimes I would get a gig as the guitar player on the tour or for the artist. And then other times they'd be like, hey, we actually need a guitar tech who can double on this X, Y, and Z. And so I was learning a lot of this stuff on the fly, but I was always good at reading manuals. I understood MIDI. And I always had like it was mostly, most of the problems, if I ever ran into any, were really esoteric problems. So, I would just, email the whatever company, call whoever the artist rep was, and just be like, hey, I have this kind of like situation. How do I do this X, Y, Z? And I would just kind of bank it in my memory. So I started doing that. And then I guess in town, I started developing a reputation for being the guy who, one of my friends calls me the wolf, if you remember from Pulp Fiction, where he just goes like, yes, I'm here to fix problems. My name's the wolf. I solve problems. So a lot of it is just from the problem solving aspect of like, hey, can we just pay you, bring you down to a production rehearsal? We're having XYZ problems with XYZ rig. And I was just kind of like, try to figure it out. And so that's kind of how I got started. And then now it's been, a really great just part of the musical life that you have as a musician here in LA.
Man, you have like the dream job. It's like diversified. I mean, you're not stuck in any one thing. You can just keep changing and moving, and that's
Yeah,
awesome.
I love
How
it
did
because you're kind of in and out of the drama sometimes, which is cool.
Yeah.
Like, but yeah, and I just love working with a lot of different people, a lot of different situations. I always love all kinds of music, and so it's nice to have variety rather than like some people win the lotto and then they become like the guitar player for the Stones or something, and then they just do that into the sunset. And I never had that luxury, and I don't think a lot of people from my generation do in terms of being musicians. So you have to do a lot of different things, but I think it's okay. I enjoy it. Some people would want a quote unquote dream gig. I think it's like anything else. You just make the best of what you're doing at the time you're doing it.
So I can't remember. How did we first meet you? Was it at some of the NAMM shows or something else?
Yes, because I'm a total nerd geek person. And also, like, I really whoops, almost dropped this. For me, a lot of times when I'm working with clients, sometimes I may be on the phone with, so I think I may have called you, Ron or Sherry, like for a rig I was working on, or I was working with an artist at the time. And I always try to make it a point at NAMM to like go meet whoever was because I didn't want to just be some nameless, faceless, anonymous voice on a phone that I talk to occasionally, and they're in my inbox. So I did that. But the other thing was too, there were just so many rigs that I was just like, guys, we got to get an effects gizmo in here, guys, we got to get a GT in here, guys, a PVC would solve all this, and people would try to maybe come up with like a solution that maybe you're using like 3 different products to kind of like cover their bases. And I was just like, this would be just like 100 times easier to save everybody a headache if you just, if you're using an analog pedal board with your favorite pedals, like a PBC switcher is just like gonna solve like 99% of all the problems you have. You can build presets, you can use the loops as you want. All your Strymon pedals, MIDI, MIDI controllable pedals, you can switch to whatever your favorite patches are, and you don't have to ever like crouch down and tweak on the fly. So every time, go
we
ahead.
got so lucky because, being in this niche, it was just kind of an accident. But one of the first people we met was Dave Friedman at a NAMM show. And he's like, I need this. And then, by the way, I need you to make this, and I need this, and I need that. And then started meeting all the other rig builders and a lot of the guitar techs. And they were always giving Ron, like, Ron, I need this. I need this. That's kind of how that grew. And it's kind of strange and weird and funny that, most of the guitar techs know who we are, and the big bands, but most regular guitar players so far have never heard of us.
Right. And, like I always try to recommend all the RJM products because like I can't think of any other competitor or whatever that has the catalog of the products that solve like pretty much anything any guitar player would ever need. And, ironically too, like Dave is like one of the, his shop is like right next to one of the big rehearsal studios. He's down the street from where I live. And I'm all, and that's how Dave and I met. And again, he would bring me in because the number one thing for why maybe I found myself in this little niche too is Dave Friedman. He's called me on occasion to come in and be like, can you just program the MIDI on this rig? Because I gotta, like
he's got a million other things to do.
Yeah. He's like, Eddie Van Halen's amp is over there. I got to work on it, and that's the point. Like Dave Friedman's time isn't best spent, trying to like program preset 1 to go to this thing on this rack. And I want to be the guy who's like going to let Dave Friedman be Dave Friedman. I want to let the guy be all my clients, Dweezil, Steve Vai, all these guys. I just like, here, get me in there because I want you, because I'm such a big fan of what you do that I want you to be able to just be the best version of you. And then I'll do this stuff. I'll take care of this. So I can also be front row, side stage, watching some of my favorite bands and artists like do their thing. And same thing with Dave, and all the rig builders in town. It's the same thing. They always like call me and be like, listen, I need to wire up a pedal board for XYZ artists. Can you just get in here and just like program this thing? And it's not that they don't have the aptitude to do it. It's more that like, what is their time worth? And what is their attention worth to go to this? So, yeah.
Well, you came through at the right time, probably just, you were at the right age learning the fractal, and that became huge. And then you probably really got known for that, didn't you, at first?
Yeah, I was one of the first adopters of the fractal products in the touring world here in LA, I would say, because at the time, a lot of people were using some of their competitors, and I just was on a recommendation from a friend of mine who, he works at like Sir Guitars now, but he was in a big touring band. He just said, hey, I was letting him know my frustrations of like, I can't get a good guitar tone out of some of these other modelers. What should I do? Like, I got to do all fly dates for this tour. And he's like, I got this thing. It's called a fractal. It's really awesome. And, and we came in there. But the funny thing is like, my introduction to the RJM products were happening in parallel because again, I was coming from that transitionary point where everybody was starting to go away from amps and pedals into modelers. So I was still using a lot of legacy rigs. Sometimes I would be the sub guitar player and I would show up and then there would be a loops, some kind of loop switcher, either the Voodoo Labs Hex or any of the RJM switchers. And I was like, oh, that's so cool. That's how this works. And then I could open up the rack drawer and I would get in there and fiddle with, the guitar player sounds that I was like subbing for just to get, because, every guitar player is different. What works for him on this, let's say it's a huge rock rhythm guitar sound in the chorus or something. I'm like, well, that's too much gain for what I would do. So how do I adjust it in here? So I found that the RJM products were so easy to program, even for a layman at the time when I first started using them. And then later on, as we were getting out of the rack drawer, amp switching kind of thing, and we were going into modelers, it was still like a lot of using RJM products. So like, for example, Dweezil Zappa, for many tours, he would always use fractals, but he would use analog fuzz pedals. So obviously we can't daisy chain 100 fuzz pedals in a row. That's just going to sound terrible or cause a lot of problems. Or he's going to be sitting there just stepping on pedals like he's playing piano with his feet. So we had to use a lot of the, the rack switchers, all the RJM rack switchers. And then the cool thing was the Fractal was sending all the MIDI changes, or we would use a MIDI controller to do all that kind of stuff, and made it so much easier. And again, like all the stuff in the ecosystem just like works seamlessly together. Never had any problems with the rig on tours, getting beaten up, thrown into overhead compartments on planes, those kinds of things. Like, that's why it's like, I always try to just recommend the most bulletproof solutions for my clients. Cause that's like, look, if you just get this, you're never going to have an issue. And these things are going to be used for life. Like, one of my clients is Billy Howardell, and he's had me go into Billy Howardell from A Perfect Circle. He's had me go into the locker, grab some of the gear, and he's like, okay, there's a bunch of GT controllers in there. Can you just go get them? And I'm like, I pull them out, plug my laptop in, and I was like, oh wow, cool. These are I can see all the presets from all the tours they've done in the last 10 years. And again, it just lives on that unit. And instead of having to program the entire show from scratch, we can just grab the sounds that we need. Because the Perfect Circle, there was a point where they weren't touring a lot anymore. And so, Billy was doing some of his own music. And then when A Perfect Circle started touring again, it was like, oh no, do we have to build a new rig from scratch? Or can we use the old rig? Can we use the old sounds? And the cool thing is, for artists that are like legacy artists, you can just, still get your old presets. Even Billy was like, oh, he dug up he forwarded me an old email, like had some of his RJM presets in there. And he's like, hey, can we just load these onto the GTs? And I was like, yeah, no problem. Drag and drop, easy to go. Yeah. So that's why I love, doing all this kind of stuff, because you get to be a part of the history too, which is kind of cool for me.
It is. And I think that's fun for Ron too. Plus he gets to geek out with a lot of really cool people.
Yeah.
Right, Ron.
Yeah.
So I know we need to kind of wrap up soon, because you've got lots of things going on. Ron, you have any last questions that we can ask Rosh that you're
Well,
wondering?
one thing I should point out, that anyone who's watching this, we couldn't do this one live for some reasons, and but post them in the comments, and we'll try to answer them later if we can.
Yeah, maybe we could have you on a second time if there's a lot of people that, have some questions and want to go deeper into like some of these rigs, like, who knows, Perfect Circle or whatever.
Yeah, I could, one thing, like, if they have any questions on any of the rigs I've built, I can always like send you a follow-up video. I'll just read the question.
What we could do is, if you've got pictures or videos of previous rigs that you've built, we could put those on like a carousel, and then, have people get on and ask questions about different rigs. Because
I'll
sure you get
try
questions
to
a lot when people find out like who you build for.
Yeah, it's always like, oh, what do they use? And the cool thing is, like, a lot of times, they're all in like the Premier Guitar rig rundown. So I just go, well, like, it's in that video, just check it out. And it's, I mean, the thing I always, there's like, the drinking game or whatever is like, take a shot every time you hear blah, blah, blah. So I always feel like every time I see one of those rig rundowns, like, take a shot if you hear, oh, we're using the RJM, blah, 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 blah. And it's always like, I was like, there you go. And there you go. But I think that speaks for itself. I mean, anybody who's ever like, oh, should we use, XYZ thing? But it's like, if you look at the roster of, and I haven't worked with everybody, but if you just like look at the roster of just even people I've worked with who use all the RJM products, I mean, it is pretty astounding. Maroon 5, Perfect Circle, Def Leppard, like, so, and then you look at the roster of everybody who uses the products. I would it would be hard pressed to not go, well, why not just go with what all these guys are doing? If they can go around the world, never have a problem, they're not going to have some kind of like hiccup at the gig. If you are, let's say, not in a world famous touring band like Maroon 5 or whatever, and you're just, playing locally, and you are going to use, you either have like a kind of a modeler, or you're using, amp pedal board, loop in a rack or whatever, or you're in a tribute band, whatever. I feel like the fact that these guys can tour worldwide, I think you can play locally without having too much of an issue. or having any type of hiccup on programming these things, because I don't think it's very difficult at all. And even some of the clients, like as much as some of, like, let's say my not famous clients, I have a lot of clients that I work with that, aren't in famous touring bands, but they all are guitar players playing locally or whatever. Um, Another thing that happens a lot is, like, I will show them how to do it. I'll just be like, here's how you program it in the RJM. Here's how you build a preset, turn these loops on, hit saves, transfer right down to the unit. And then they go, great, awesome. And, after a couple sessions, that I like never hear from them again, because and in a way, it's like, yes, would I love to work with them in the future? But it's also like, okay, cool. They learned exactly how to do
That's
it.
good to know, because we get people that I think do want have somebody else like program it, maybe
Mhm.
help them on their fractal or quad cortex or the, Kemper, whatever it is, and they've got all these things and they're like, just wish there was somebody and I'm not famous that could just help me and then I could, get it all set up. And so tell me, I know you have a website and some YouTube video, a channel. Tell us about that quickly before we go so that people
Sure.
can learn where to find you.
Sure. You can find me at roshroslin.com, roshroslin.com. You can find me on Instagram at roshroslin. And then my YouTube channel is youtube.com/roshroslin. So pretty simple.
And on your YouTube channel, you have a whole bunch of videos like showing the fractal and quite a few things to
Yeah. So
show
my YouTube
people.
channel is basically, it's a lot of instructional material on how to program different, guitar rigs, mainly focusing on the Fractal products. But I do have other things on there. I plan on doing a series about, programming stuff for Ableton, for playback rigs, all these kinds of things that um, I, you know, a lot of people in town have been, asking me to make these kinds of videos and for a very long time, but I've just always been so busy. But I found that there is a community of people online that really love all this kind of stuff, and they also love the instruction, and they also, maybe they only need like 2 or 3 features. And that's the thing about a lot of these products that are out on the market these days, like a Fractal or Kemper or any of the RJM products. They think, oh no, if I don't learn how to use every single feature of this, I'm not utilizing it. And it's like,
You're right.
you
Yeah,
don't
you don't
really,
need to know
you don't
everything.
need to know everything. Some guitar players that I work with, I show them how to build one basic preset to turn on, 3 or 4 loops in a PVC switcher, and that's the only thing they need. They go, cool, perfect. I got my clean sound, my, kind of ethereal chorused 80s clean sound, my overdrive, my lead sound, and then they're done. So the cool thing is, it's not like you need to build like 100 presets for your set list for your cover gig or your wedding band or whatever. Sometimes 5 or 6 presets is all you need, but you get all the extra functionality of like being able to switch your amp, turn on the relays, turn on the buffers on and off. If you're using fuzz pedals, fuzz pedals hate buffers, those kinds of things. Like you get the true bypass, you get all these different things. Maybe it'll switch your Strymon, delay pedal to the 3 patches you like. So you don't need to use every single feature. You just need to find the features that work for you. And I always find that the RJM products is like, here's the 5 things that they love. And then that's what all my clients and artists just end up doing. And then and it's like, they don't even scratch the surface of everything it could do, but it always works for them.
Wow. Well, thanks for being on today. And if you've got questions, feel free to post them because we'll have Rosh back on if there's enough questions and have him answer some of these things. And we will not be doing a live stream the next few weeks. We've got something going on, but then after that, we'll be back with more guitar techs. So anyway, thank you so much, Rosh.
Thanks, Sherry. Thanks, Ron. You guys are
Yeah,
the
and
best.
especially thanks for helping our customers out, and by extension, me. So
Yes, yes.
I
We
don't
always
have to
know
be
it's
on the
like,
phone with everybody.
yeah, there'll be
We
somebody high
massively
profile
appreciate
calling,
it.
and I'm like, I gotta call Rosh and see if he can get over
Yeah,
there.
exactly.
Absolutely. Would love to in the future. Thanks so much, guys. I really appreciate it.
All right.
Thanks, man.